Well, Jenn, thank you so much for being here with me today. I'm really excited about this conversation. And this is my first podcast that I'm doing solo. So you're my inaugural solo guest. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so very excited to be here with you and excited for being here for the first solo event. So that's awesome.
Yeah. And I wanted to share a little bit about how this conversation came into being, because it was very organic and spontaneous. And so in my work and in conversations recently, it's really been coming up a lot around women having issues around being able to enjoy sex, to enjoy their own sexuality, feeling very turned off by it and numb to that or not interested. And it was just one of those themes that was coming up from all different angles. And so when that happens to me, I start to pay attention. And I thought, okay, what can I do here in terms of being of service? What might I be able to offer? Because for me, the rewilding experience is waking up to our true nature. And in that experience, there's often an awakening of a lot of energy. Could be emotional energy that we haven't been present to, could be sexual energy that we haven't been present to. So to me, it's all part of the aliveness of who we are. And as we connect more deeply with our true nature, we become more present to the fullness of who we are, not just on the spiritual level, but also on the human level. And so what I got inspired to offer is a free 10-day program that's going to be coming out the end of July. And it's the title of it now, and I've changed the title, and we can talk about that, is Rewilding Feminine Pleasure. And it's definitely going to look in the direction of sex positivity, but it's not just focused on sex. It's really about awakening to the pleasure of the human experience, to the sensual pleasures that's available to us, to all of that. And so I was sharing about this program, giving a sneak preview of it on a supervision call with the Rewilding guides, and I'll share a little bit about who they are. So I ran a 6-month practitioner program that started last year, and I'm still offering ongoing supervision calls for the practitioners that participated in that program, who are all amazing certified guides who are bringing this understanding out into the world in all of those unique ways. And Jenn is one of the Rewilding guides, and I'm so grateful that you're on that call, because as I was sharing about the program, one of the guys at that time, it was called Rewilding Pleasure for Women. And the question that came forward was, well, I don't identify as a woman, but I identify as female. Who is this program for? And I immediately realized that I was stepping over a ledge into my blind spot, and something that I needed to learn more about and educate myself more on, because I didn't quite know how to answer that question. And fortunately, Jenn was on the call. I said, Jenn, can you help out here? What am I trying to say? Because I don't really know. And that was a big impetus for us having this conversation, because one, I want to educate myself more, but I think it's a conversation that is valuable for everybody. And Angus and I are really committed to inclusion, diversity, and educating ourselves on those matters. I mentioned to you, Jenn, and I did check with my daughter that she was okay with me sharing this, but our younger daughter came out to us as gay probably just a month ago now. So there's all of this exciting exploration going on, and it was something that was really celebrated in our home, and we're really proud of her for having that self-reflection and freedom within herself to share that with us and the community at large, with her friends and so forth. But I'm just really looking forward to you sharing more of what you shared with me already as part of the evolution of how the title changed on the program, and also in general, what your experience have been both professionally and personally, because I know that you work in the area of helping businesses to be more inclusive, to have understanding about being welcoming to all the identities. And so for me, it's just a really rich conversation.
Yeah, I was so happy that we were able to engage in that conversation and during our supervision. I felt like the last 5 or 6 years of my experience and learning like was really had come to a place of being fruitful outside of my normal work. So I'm a pediatric nurse practitioner by trade, and I work with LGBTQ youth in my area. And I also help to educate other community organizations, whether they be social work organizations, um, educational programs at universities and that kind of thing, to understand the best way to affirm and support LGBTQ young people and adults in our care practices. So the majority of my work has been within like a medical or social work type setting and looking at that. Um, but the language that we use and the images that we present can really send messages to people in the community, letting them know whether or not they're welcome in the space. And so when we had this discussion in supervision about language, I thought that, oh, this is a really great place to, use some of my personal experience.
Yeah.
And I was really grateful to be able to do that.
Yeah. So what I did is I sent you the link and I said, this is what I'm thinking of doing. I'd really appreciate your feedback and like to hire your services in terms of consulting me on this. So if you just maybe walk us through your initial reaction, your feedback, just so that it can help everybody understand where you're coming from.
Sure. So when I'm looking at something, whether it be pictorials or whether it be written word, I'm looking to see if things are inclusive, if they have language that reads as open and not closed. And what I mean by that is that we all are fish in this water, right? We're living in our culture, we're submersed in it. We don't sometimes see that culture that we're inhabiting. And in the United States, the culture tends to be very cisgendered, heterosexual oriented. And so it's very easy for people to unintendedly leave out other members of the community who are sexual or gender minorities. So when I'm looking through it, I'm just looking for language that is inclusive, including other identities, that's not focusing just on that cisgendered or heterosexual normative area. And so in your website, there was only 2 or 3 places where there was mention of gender, and I made some initial suggestions. And then, we'll have a conversation more because I think that even my initial suggestions could be refined to make sure that I think I overcorrected in some of it and was becoming more inclusive of sexual and gender minorities, but we're then leaving out the majority. So that's something that you have to have in balance. Making sure everyone feels welcome also includes not only making it open and accepting for sexual and gender minorities, but also making sure that the majority is seen in that space too, unless the space is intended just for sexual and gender minorities. And then,
Right,
we
right.
can go that way for
Yeah,
sure.
exactly. And in terms of the distinction, um, in terms of using the term woman versus feminine, are you able to speak a little bit to how my use of that word, rewilding pleasure for women, was limiting versus something that was more expansive?
Sure. So if we're living in this with the water, right, we're the fish, and we're not seeing our culture for what it is, just using the word woman rather than including transgender and cisgendered women or non-binary feminine people, a lot of people will assume that we're speaking only to cisgendered women.
Hmm.
And that language doesn't feel as open or as expansive as saying cisgendered and transgender women and non-binary feminine people. It's a lot more words, but it is more clear about who you're intending to serve. And so after our initial conversation and supervision, it was very clear that you wanted to serve people who wanted to tap into that divine feminine energy, but didn't necessarily have assigned female at birth body makeup. And so by expanding the language, we also expand the audience. I also had a look at the photographs and suggested, adding more pictorials that would give that messaging to the audience that they were welcome there, including some pictures of people that maybe looked more non-binary, or a picture of a transgender woman, because that is really important for a community, whether it be a sexual and gender minority community, whether it be a racial minority community. It's really important for people to see people that look like them when they're looking at offerings, when they're looking at educational materials in a doctor's office, when they're seeing media on television. When they don't see themselves, they don't feel welcome, they don't feel affirmed, and they kind of just really feel like they're left out. This isn't for them. It doesn't acknowledge their experience. So by making sure that we have these things present, language, pictorials, that kind of thing, we can give clear messaging that they are indeed welcome, and they are able to receive that, versus the assumption of, yeah, I meant everyone, but wasn't able to message that correctly.
Yeah. And I think this is where um, it was one of my blind spots, because I looked at age in those pictures. I looked at body shape. I looked at diversity in skin color. Like I thought about a lot of the things when I was choosing them, and that was not the one that jumped to mind. And so that was really good for me to get that feedback and recognize that that really is something that I need to be more aware of, in terms of making sure that that's included, so that I can be welcoming. And it's, as you're saying, it's not that I want to say I'm specializing in a certain area, or this is only for members in those minority groups, but I do want to be inclusive and welcoming if somebody wants to join in. And so I really appreciate you helping me to see that, and to take that on board in a way that I can wake up more to my unconditioned bias, and see how that plays out, not just in that area of life, but in every area of life.
Yeah, and that's really beautiful when we can have that awakening. And I started doing this work in about 2016, and it was very enlivening, because as I learned more and more and more, and I woke up to that, I just became more ignited with like the passion to serve people, and to make sure that other people could hear these stories, and see the depth and richness of these identities, and to understand that they're beautiful whole people who are just, really seeking to be seen and to be heard for who they are, and not who people assume them to be. So it's been a really beautiful journey for me, and I love that I'm able to share that. I'm very very impassioned about sharing it, and so I love that opportunity. I'm realizing while we're speaking, though, Rohini, that I didn't define some terms that might
Yeah.
be confusing for people.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. So I've been saying, cisgendered, non-binary, and all of that kind of thing. And I'm so apologetic. I did not define those terms.
Yeah.
So cisgender is referring to someone who is assigned a gender at birth, and as they grow and develop, their gender identity is aligned with that. So cis in chemistry is like when two molecules are on the, or yeah, two molecules are on the same side of a larger component. And so we use that term cisgender because both things are on the same side, they align. And transgender is a term that people use to describe people whose sex assigned at birth, usually based on physical anatomy, is the opposite. So someone assigned male at birth who identifies as a woman, and in my practice, we just say that they are a woman, right? So someone assigned male at birth who's a woman would be a transgender woman. Someone who's assigned female at birth, but is a man, is a transgender man. And so that can be a little confusing for people sometimes, and be a little tricky. But those are the terms that we currently use to identify those two large groups, two distinctions. Now, I want to recognize that the binary, or there being male, female, whether it be cisgendered or transgender, can sometimes be a little bit problematic for people, right? So there's a lot of pushback about the way that we define gender, even in this way, that it's one or the other. And really, gender is very rich, it's very diverse. There is lots of variability in our communities, and in the natural makeup, even genetically and physically of people, because we have intersex designations or characteristics in people sometimes. So non-binary, or genderqueer attempts to kind of encapsulate that other identification. So someone who doesn't identify completely on the binary as male or female, transgender, cisgender, whichever, but is somewhere in the realm of in between, next to, behind. And so when I visualize or think about gender, I think about it in a very three-dimensional way. It's not a line, it's a cube or a sphere, or however you want to think about it. You can be up or down or sideways from female or male. And so a lot of individuals who are like, yeah, physically, maybe I'd like to look more masculine, but I'm feeling very feminine on some days, and they have a more divergent way of looking at their gender. I guess divergent's really not a nice word, but more nuanced way of looking at their gender would identify as non-binary or genderqueer. And then I'll be remiss to not mention that if some people do identify as non-binary, female and male, sometimes all at the same time, sometimes feeling differently on different days, and commonly people will call that gender fluid if they feel the need to label it. So that is the 101 on terminology.
And then could you also just say a little bit more about intersex, just for people so that they understand what that
Oh,
means
sure.
too? Yeah.
So people who are born intersex, they either have the physical characteristics of both male or female, or underdeveloped of one and some of the other. And that has, again, a very diverse and rich and variable presentation. But then some people are also born intersex genetically. So there's genetic makeups that are XXY and sometimes XXX, and those people can sometimes present, for example, an XXY would present as assigned male at birth, but really has the genetic characteristics of female and male. And there can be some breast tissue development, slow puberty and development in those situations. And I've had a couple of clients who actually identify as trans women who are genetically XXY. And they did not know that until they needed to get some other things looked at as far as like their growth and development as we were caring for them. And there's a lot of times, not always, but are a lot of times where people I see who identify as trans masculine, they have a condition called PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, where they are producing already an endogenously higher amount of testosterone. So there's lots of diversity, even biologically, in the community. And so to adhere to the binary of, male, female is really not what is actually happening naturally and or culturally.
And I think that's also really important to note. This is not some new thing coming about.
Right.
What's new is the language, the acknowledgement within this culture, because other cultures, and I haven't done the research well, but I was speaking with someone that was saying that Indigenous cultures, there's been a lot more respect for this full spectrum that you're speaking of, and that it hasn't been categorized in the same way that perhaps we have in more Western culture.
For sure. And in some Indigenous cultures, they have what they would term two-spirited. So they acknowledge that as completely normal, and actually in some of the Indigenous cultures as something that makes them special or unique. It's because they have two spirits and they're blessed twice.
Yeah.
So
Acknowledging the gift of that as well. And then could you speak a little bit, when we were talking, you talked about the internalized transphobia and the homophobia that is just sort of part of that water that we swim in. And I think that's also really important, as my experience of saying like, wow, that is part of that, me not looking at diversity in that way. I'm certainly not intentionally wanting to be that, but that's part of my conditioning that I'm waking up from.
For sure. There is, as the water that we're swimming in, there's a lot of messaging we get from families, from our spiritual communities, even just from the media, about what it means to be a sexual or gender minority, and what place you hold in society as one. And um, that can be very, very tough for young people as they grow and develop, depending on their family support, their community that they're living in. But even as a person who identifies as cisgendered and heterosexual, we can internalize those messages too, and think that particular identities are quote unquote bad, or that something about them is different or not acceptable. And we might not realize that we're internalizing them. We might not realize that we're actually acting on them. And so having that inward look to how am I seeing people, how am I seeing myself, is a wonderful thing for everyone to do. But for people who identify as LGBTQ, having that look inside and seeing how they feel about it can be scary, because what they're seeing is that I'm different, right? I'm different than what is expected or what is considered appropriate in my family or my spiritual community or my school. And they can very, very harshly judge themselves. And because of that pressure from our cultural beliefs and
Mhm.
the way that we message to people, a lot of young people experience a severe amount of distress and anxiety and depression related to their identities. Most of the kids I care for between the ages of 12 and 21. And it is very rare that I have a client that is not struggling with some sort of um, internalized trouble, and that resulting in anxiety and depression.
Mhm.
And the beautiful thing about this understanding and my Rewilding guide training and other workshops I've done with you and others in the past is that I am able to be an adult in their life that's affirming, supportive, sees who they are, affirms who they are, but then can point them in the direction of knowing that they're completely whole, that they have innate health with them, that they are love in the world and being enacted, and help to guide them towards seeing that health and seeing that they don't have to take that message. They don't have to make it their own. They don't have to believe it. That can be somebody else's idea, somebody else's message, and that they can believe the true love and wholeness within them. And for so many kids, this is hard. It's hard for them to understand that it's okay for me to trust that how I feel is right, how I want people to see me, how I am me, my true self. Um, it's hard for them to believe it's safe to do that. And
Yeah.
I don't blame them, because in so many times it isn't safe in our world to do that. And depending on your community and again, the family you're living in and the spiritual communities that you might belong to, sometimes it isn't actually safe. But I work with them to see that it's safe inside of them. It's
Mhm.
safe within them, and how they choose to open that up to the world, how they choose to express that is on their own timeline and their own level of readiness, but that they can release the ideas of our culture, release the messages that they have seen that tell them otherwise, and just really acknowledge that that's not them, that's not for
Mhm.
them, and they can be beautiful and wonderful as just as they are.
Yeah. And that's so affirming and beautiful that you can be that presence in their lives, and that you'll also be um, helping other organizations to be that presence in a larger group of people, helping a larger group of people. And what you're sharing really speaks to me very personally, um, as as part of the conversation that I had with our daughter. She said that she knew that Angus and I would be supportive. And there's a funny story. I don't know if you know, there's a board game that we would play with the girls called the Game of Life. Do you know that game?
Mhm, yeah,
So you have to
mhm,
go through, and it's so heteronormative. It's like you have to go to college, and if you don't go to college, you end up pretty much living on the street. I don't know. I remember all of those things, but we would have fun playing this game, but you would have to go through certain life markers, and one of the markers was marriage. And so, and you'd have a little car as one of your pieces on the game board, and when you pass that marker, you would put another little piece in that car to go through life with you. And we had always said, when they hit that marker, do you want a blue a blue one to join you or a pink one to join you? Like, there was always choice on that level. So there was some awareness that I had about the importance of not assuming around that. But when I had the conversation with her, she said that she recognized how she had internalized homophobia, and how that had been what had made it harder to have the conversation with us. Even though she knew that we would be supportive, it was something that still she was up against, that conditioning within herself. And that's part of what we really acknowledged with her, was her courage to have that kind of self-reflection and the willingness to share with us and to trust us in that way. And I'd love if there's anything more you'd like to share about that based on your experience.
Yeah, it is definitely something that kids are up against. Whether, and I say kids, that's kind of ageist of me, but I mean, I deal mostly with kids, but kids, young people, even adults, they're really up against, how will I be received? And um, how am I going to feel about that reception? There are a lot of times where people will wait a really long time. They'll know when they're 11 that there's something that they want to share, something about their gender identity, something about their sexuality. They know very young, but they don't know how to articulate it, and they don't know how to share it with other people. And they're really, really afraid, even in safe spaces like the home that you provided for your girls. They are still afraid that they might have been misreading that, or that the rest of the family or the rest of the community won't accept them. And so they're not able to live their true expression of self, to be their authentic self. Um, and I see that all the time in the youth that I take care of. Um, when my son was 16, he came out to me as gay. And for a while, I had seen some things, and I was wondering, and I had asked him when he was 14, and he was very upset with me when I asked him. So I just decided that I wouldn't ask him directly again. And we were working on a school paper for a health class, and it was talking about dating and sex. And we went through the whole exercise, just assuming, that he was heterosexual, right? That he was straight. And at the end, I said to him, I know, you know what, I love you no matter what. And he just said, the answer is yes.
Mm.
So no one ever asked the question again directly, but I acknowledged that that was a possibility, and he let me know. And honestly, for a couple of years, we didn't really talk about it much. There was a lot that he processed through. Anytime I brought it up, he was not open to talking about it, because I'm his mom,
Yeah.
like, I want to talk about this with my mom. But now, he works in the area of, he worked in the area of sexual health and public health with LGBTQ people. And now he's studying clinical psychology, and his goal is to work and support people in that realm too. And he's flourished, right? And he's blossomed, and he's such a beautiful, vibrant, connected and dedicated young person. And he is just living his best life. And that was a process, right? It was a growing that happened over years for him. And there was always along the way that fear. And we're very lucky to live in a community where there wasn't any true possibility for harm. But for a lot of people, even just a few miles from where we live, the possibility for harm, whether it be emotional or physical, is very real when sharing these identities. So
Yeah.
it takes a lot of bravery. So when a young person, or even an adult person, is opening up in that way to you, we should be able to recognize that that takes a lot of courage, a lot of strength, and resolve to share. And so that's really a gift and a blessing if someone is feeling comfortable enough to share that with you.
Yeah. And I think that was what I was struck by. is that I could feel from our daughter that she was tapping into that courage within herself, and that was a big deal that she was sharing this information with us in that way. And I was just so proud of her taking those steps and empowering herself in that way. Is there anything that you would like to share for parents around this, to support parents navigating unknown territory in this area?
Yeah, a couple things that I always like to share with parents is that it's okay that you don't know, because you might not, if you're not someone who has one of these shared identities, then you're not going to be familiar. But don't put that on the young person to tell you. It's not their job to educate you. Now, if they're open and they want to share with you and they're excited about sharing with you about it, then please receive that. But you can't necessarily ask them to educate you. So using the resources that we have on the web and other community members, there's usually a PFLAG, which, oh gosh, on the spot, I'm not going to remember what PFLAG stands for. I don't remember. But
I'll make a note. We can put it in the show notes.
Okay, that's great. Put it in the show notes. I'm just feeling pressured and I can't remember.
It's okay, don't worry. What is it? What are you referencing though? Because I don't know what it is either.
Yeah, so PFLAG is an organization that supports families, children, and loved ones.
Right.
In I believe the P is parents, in the community, and they have all kinds of wonderful services and groups for both parents and for youth. And so you could use that resource, as well as all 9 resources like GLISTEN, which is an LGBTQ organization. There's lots of wonderful things. And I can send you a list of those resources too, Rohini, and you can put those in the show notes as well. Yeah. So don't have the child be your educator, right? That's one thing that I find parents that's kind of a misstep sometimes. But the other things that I always like to share are that love your child, just love them and let them know that you love them, and give that unconditionally, without exception, and do the best you can. There's going to be situations with pronouns. I at work am great with pronouns. My middle child is non-binary. I mess their pronouns up all the time because I've spent 13 years with them with one set of pronouns. And now, we've transitioned to the they, them pronouns. And I use they, them all the time at work. I have to affirm people's identities with their pronouns at work all the time. But at home, I make a mistake and I mess up, and she forgives me. Now, baby sister does not. She can sometimes be a little hard on me. But you're gonna make mistakes, and that's okay. And when you do make a mistake, you just say, I'm really sorry. I meant to say they, them, and keep it moving. If we over apologize, if we get caught up in our own insecurity and thinking about, oh my gosh, I just hurt their feelings. What am I supposed to do? Oh, I'm so bad. You're right. We can go down that spiral really fast. And just catching yourself and saying, oh, I'm sorry, keep it moving, and not get caught up in the processing of this mistake, quote unquote. And that really works best for most people, because when you do get caught up in your insecurity, when you do apologize profusely or make a big deal of the situation, you're now then asking the person that you made the mistake with to comfort you. And that is another emotional burden for people, to have to then comfort their surrounding people for, oh, it's okay, don't worry, you didn't hurt me. And that's asking a lot of someone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as part of the definitions 101, can you say a little bit more about pronouns?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So it's really interesting. There's been a kind of shift across social media where people are putting their pronouns in to kind of acknowledge that pronouns are something you shouldn't assume. And pronouns are she, her, he, him, they, them. There are some alternative pronouns like they, them, zer is with an X. And some non-binary or gender fluid people will use those alternatives. There are other alternative pronouns that are out there. And so when you're meeting someone, especially like in a professional setting, in my job, we always introduce ourselves. So I would say, hi, my name's Jenn Miller-Allgeier. I use she, they pronouns. And people don't necessarily always use just one set. I'm comfortable with she and they as a genderqueer person myself. I'm fine with both of those. I identify as a feminine, genderqueer, or non-binary person. I have a lot of privilege in my identity because I'm very cis-passing as a woman. Um, but the movement of putting pronouns in our social media and in our Zoom links and Zoom names and that kind of thing is to acknowledge that it's something we should all be talking about, asking about. It should be part of our normative culture to just acknowledge that you can't assume someone's pronouns by the way that they present.
Yeah, thank you. And I really appreciate that clarification that just, again, is all part of making this become um, mainstream in a sense, to something that people are aware of. These assumptions are assumptions, and it's always important to move beyond our assumptions to what is really present in life, so that we can have that deeper connection and deeper understanding as well, and have the inclusivity that comes with that.
Yeah.
Is there anything else? I'd love to talk more about just the more general theme of sex positivity, because
Mhm.
I think that that's something as well where there's just a lot of conditioning when it comes to sexuality that is a weight for most people, I think, all across the board. But is there anything else you want to say about what you've said so far that you haven't covered before we move on to just that more general topic?
No, I think that we've touched on the beginning of all of the things that were important.
Thank you. Thank you. And again, I really appreciate it. So this was something that came up when we were having our conversation, and I'd love to hear what your thoughts are in terms of um, affirming sexuality, how that's not affirmed currently. Just what's your experience with that?
Oh gosh. So in my professional work with working with young people, as I mentioned, I work with LGBTQ youth. About 70% of the people I work with are transgender, and the remaining portion of the people I work with are either lesbian, gay, bisexual, and or straight. And so I work a lot with gay men, and they come for the health center just for normal services and what have you, but a lot of times we're providing sexual health services. So we talk a lot about sex positivity, about being safe as far as avoiding STDs and that kind of thing. In my clinic, we prescribe PrEP, which is pre-exposure prophylaxis for HIV. It's a once a day pill that has two medications that helps prevent HIV up to 95% when used with condoms. And so we're addressing their physical health in our visits for the most part. But we also do want to be holistic, and we talk to them about how they're feeling emotionally and how they're experiencing pleasure with their partnerships, or whether they're participating in sex for pleasure, or if it's more of a feeling of an obligation. Sometimes the young people that I'm working with, they feel like it's the next natural step in their relationship, that they really love their partner and they feel like they need to or have to have sex. Or they're with someone that's already been having sex in a different relationship, and they feel like in order to keep the relationship that they will need to do that as well. And so we try to talk about sex in a very positive way, but also acknowledging that it should be something that is your choice, and your choice both emotionally as well as the physical aspects of it. And layered on top of that, so those are conversations I have with all youth, right? So straight, LGBTQ youth included. But when we're talking to people who are lesbian, gay, and bisexual, there's the additional judgment that they're grappling with again, where they're maybe not out to their family. So they're not able to have that same kind of sharing of their relationship. If they have a new partner that they're excited about, they might not be able to share that with their family or their friends because they might not be out to them. If they have someone special in their lives that they, typically say you go away to college, you meet someone, you're really excited about them and you want to bring them home to meet your family for the holidays. And for lesbian, gay, and bisexual people, that might not be something that can happen. And so there is in addition to, the sexual health aspects of our talks and our visits, there is that component of like, how are you feeling about yourself in the relationship? How is this relationship supporting you? And how are you feeling about the way that maybe you can be out in the world with it? And there's a lot of opportunity for, again, just pointing people towards that innate health and the understanding that who they choose to love is not something that is up for discussion up from other people, that it is based on how they're feeling. And there's no expression of love, in my opinion, that is bad.
Mhm.
To love someone is to love someone. And the more love that is in the world, the better a place that we have to live in.
Mhm. Absolutely. And what would you say, and I know that we talked about this previously, and you said that you were open to the exploration, but I'm curious what you've noticed in terms of your own experience of connecting more deeply with yourself through the rewilding journey, through what all of the work that you've done in terms of connecting more deeply in that way. How has that showed up for you generally, but also in related to sexuality?
Yeah. So I very early on in my understanding of the three principles and spiritual psychology and all of this stuff that I began exploring in like 2017 was looking really to address anxiety and depression in myself. I'd had a full term stillbirth in 2006, and I had found myself for a little over a decade just very lost. I was very sad. And so I started exploring this as a way of looking at that. Like, how can I feel better? How can I be more happy? And in the last few years, I wasn't looking in this direction at all, but it has really opened up my understanding of self as far as like my sensuality and my experience in romantic relationships. And I realized that in myself, I had been using, and I don't know if I want to say using, but I had been experiencing affection in a way that was, and this is in retrospect, not while I was doing it,
Mhm.
manipulative,
Mm.
right? So I realized that I had been giving and giving and giving, and I'm a very open, loving person, and I'm a nurturer, I'm a Virgo, and I wanted to take care of people and love people, but I was like giving a lot and giving probably more than I should have. I wasn't reserving some for myself. But I was not doing that selflessly or unconditionally. I thought I was, but what I saw as I, rewild myself on so many levels was that actually I had expectations of what was going to be returned to me. I had expectations that if I gave at this level, if I gave this much, that of course that person would give me back the same level or the same thing. And I expected that they would know that how I wanted that delivered, that somehow they were going to read my mind and understand that the affection I wanted back was going to be same level in an exact way that I expected it. So my poor husband, needless to say, did not know exactly what I wanted or how I wanted that to be displayed. Now I'm a love language person of words of affirmation.
Mhm.
Okay. And he's more of a like deeds of service kind of
Mhm.
person, right? And we both like to spend time together. But because of our jobs, we don't really have a lot of time home together. So he would be very much like, yeah, I'm going to make sure the house is clean for you. And I would be like, why didn't he tell me he loved me so sweetly and passionately? Like, so there was a disconnect there. And as I looked deeper, as I looked more in myself, I realized that that was because I was expecting him to be a mind reader and because I wasn't giving that affection unconditionally. And this also like played out with sex too, right? So like I thought if I was great in bed, if I was a beautiful lover, if I was doing all these things that he would know to give me those words of affirmation. Like, and there were times where I was giving in all those ways and he didn't deliver what I wanted. And I felt like this just isn't gonna work. This
Mhm.
this has failed. This is, you know, this is it. This is the time where it finally comes to an end. And after doing the inner work and rewilding and looking towards my true nature, and I realized that that's all just my thinking, right? That's all just stories I made up about what any of it meant, what the affection meant, what the words meant, what the sex meant. And after realizing that, I feel such a weight lifted, such a freedom. I don't feel obligated to say or do things because I want to get a particular response anymore. Now it's all spontaneous. It's all coming from that deep place of love and connection. It's all unconditional. And it leaves me feeling so much more at peace and connected to my husband, instead of leaving me feeling like my expectations weren't met and feeling disconnected and downtrodden. That's such an old person word to say. But yeah, it's so beautiful how things shifted, just looking in this direction. And it wasn't something I thought that I needed to fix, right? I didn't think there was a problem. I believed, I bought into all of the storylines, right? I didn't think so maybe I did think there was a problem, but I didn't think it was me. Right? So I was like, I'm giving all this. It can't be me. Look at all this giving I'm doing. But it was in my understanding of what it all meant, where the problem lied. And now it just evaporated. It just boop, was gone. I think I posted in the Rewilding community one day a little picture of Snow White, like sending a bird off. And I was like, my little caption that went with it was like, intrusive thoughts, bye bye. Like I'm saying bye bye to the intrusive thoughts, because I'd finally saw it. And when I saw it, it was gone. And now it's so different. It's so much lighter. It feels so much better.
Mm. So inspiring. And I think understanding what we're up against is so helpful. Like what, that image that you just described, understanding that you were up against intrusive thoughts, not an unresponsive husband, makes
Right.
such a huge difference. But we don't see it. Like you're talking about the fish in water. We often don't see how much our own thinking is creating that pressure inside of us. And it's very easy to pin it on people or things outside of us. And I know for myself, my journey with Angus, there was a long period in our relationship where I really felt resentful because his sex drive was higher than my sex drive. And it just created such a polarization. And I really got turned off and didn't want to have sex because the more he wanted it, the less I wanted it. And it really looked like if he would change, then all of this would be fine. And if he showed up, as you're saying, with the correct way of being with me, and it got so, he felt so judged by me that it got really hard, because he would feel like he was walking on eggshells and that he'd make one false move and it's like, it's off, game over, forget it. And I would get really kind of impatient, and he would take that personally, and it just became a mess. Sex became an area of our life where we would just, both of us, end up feeling hurt and feeling very discouraged. And this was earlier on in our relationship, but there's absolutely been ultimatums that were made, like, if this doesn't get fixed, we can't, I can't be married to you, and all of that. And I didn't know at the time that that was just his hurt feelings speaking. That was his state of mind. It didn't mean that he didn't love me, but I took all of that very personally. And it, what it did was the way I went with it was I just shut myself off from that part of myself and decided that, I don't even need to think about that part of myself. It doesn't really need to be part of my life. And if he doesn't want to be with me, so be it, but I'll be fine. And what I didn't realize at the time, and of course, like you said, it's like we're all doing the best that we can. And that's the understanding that we have in the moment. But what I didn't realize, what I was sacrificing for me,
Mhm.
and how compartmentalizing that in that way was really me uh, in my own fear, I think, of what it meant to really uh, be in that exploration that isn't just about sex. And that's why the program that I'm going to be doing isn't like, oh, how to have better sex. That's not the program. It's about how to open to the fullness of who we are and to feel
Mhm.
that energy, and that sensuality, pleasure, sexuality is part of that. And so, as part of my own personal rewilding and waking up to myself, that's what I realized, is that this is for me, and that
Right.
it's it's a way of connecting deeply with myself. You know, sexual pleasure for me, whether it's in partnership with Angus or by myself, that it's a way of connecting with that space of spiritual love that is really beautiful. And it's not just about this um conceptual idea of spirituality or this mental idea of what that is. It's like it's an embodied experience of that energy that has the aliveness in it, that I think can sort of get separated out from spirituality. And I know that the tantric traditions don't do that, but a lot of spirituality is sort of, I heard one of our guest speakers in the Rewilding community, I think he said it in his unity, but spirituality is often from the neck up. It doesn't include the body, and
Right.
sexuality is not part of that. And then I think there's a TED talk, I'll have to look it up for the show notes, but I think it's something like, is masturbation the new meditation? And I just think that there's something happening where people are getting more recognition about the importance of embracing being in this human form, and recognizing that it's through deep connection with that aliveness that we connect with the fullness of who we are beyond our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So if there's anything that you'd like to add to that or share about that, I'd love to hear.
Yeah, I can relate to everything you just said for sure. When I was younger and less caught up in the things that happened after I lost my daughter, I felt like I was able to connect in that way more deeply. And um, I can remember the first time I ever held my husband's hand and like how electric it was and how connected we are. And we've always said we've been married 16 years, but together 26. And so, I mean, we've been together since we were really young. We've always said that we were destined to be together, that our spirits, our souls were, soulmates or what have you. But like when we met the very first time, like we hugged, like it was electricity, it was a deep connection. And I think over the years and life and thinking that I really got caught up in after being depressed, I started making up stories and I wasn't able to have that connection. And looking, back for that, I was blaming it on, I was trying to blame it on him. Of course it was him because I was doing all this giving. And now that I've released that, I've had that moment of clarity. Um, I feel that connection come back, right? I just look at him and I'm like, oh, you're so darn cute. Like, just even hearing his voice, I'm so excited. And it just, I spring to life with just having him close by and being around him. And that is all new and all like, you and Angus talk about all the time with the rewilding metaphor. It's all rewild. Like it was there. It's always been there. I experienced it for years before, it went away or before I stuffed it down underneath a lot of thinking. And I was able to rewild back to that and to really experience a deep emotional, spiritual connection with him that is on so many different levels, both, sexual as well as just lovingly and emotionally present. And it feels so good, right? It's
Yeah.
like, yes, I'm whole again. I feel like I can give and receive love in a way that was missing. And I some of the time I didn't realize how much was really missing. Like you said, I had kind of just decided, well, this is the way it's going to be.
Hmm.
I would try every once in a while to engage with him sexually. Like if I do this thing, then maybe he's gonna, it's gonna click something on for him. He's going to get it. Right. And then it wouldn't happen. And then I would just kind of give up and withdraw from that. And so for him, it looked a lot like I was on and on again, off again.
Yeah. So what's
Right.
happening
And
with Jen?
right, like what's wrong with her? Like, why does she keep doing this? Like, she's like hot and heavy 3 days of the week, and then 2 weeks she's kind of mopey and crabby. Like, what is wrong? And and I thought it was him, and it wasn't. It was the thinking. It was just the misunderstanding. And the more that I opened up, and the more that we talked about it, we were able to see, like, oh, that's what's been happening. I was like, hey, I realized I've been doing this thing. He's like, oh yeah, right. I noticed that. I didn't want to say anything because he was afraid of me, probably. um, but when I started noticing it and started bringing it up, he's like, yeah, I noticed too. And I was like, oh, okay. He's like, but I just kind of just stayed here and went with the flow because he didn't want to rock the boat, but he also didn't want to, he didn't say anything. So again, I was thinking it was all him. So it's so beautiful to see how, having that realization and releasing all of that thinking, and it's opened up so many aspects, like the talking about things more, the and not like hashing things out or figuring things out, but just like having an open dialogue and having that back and forth conversation where we can really, share what we're thinking or feeling about, an interaction or a situation, and not taking it personally, but just, saying, hey, here's what's going on in my little reality, and
Yeah.
here's what's going on in yours, and where do those maybe not line up or do line up or whatever. And that's great. It's so freeing. It's so nice to know that, like, my life partner has that potential of being for my whole life, whereas 2 years
Yeah.
ago I was like, I don't know about this.
Yeah.
Is it gonna last?
Yeah.
So
And I think that's one of the other, I'm just noticing my microphone's really drifting down. I need to get a new mic stand here. But the cultural norm is that we have this honeymoon period in a relationship that
mhm,
ends, and then you just kind of live with whatever's left after that, and maybe end
right.
the relationship and go on to a new one. And what the rewilding really is about awakening to how relationships can stay in that aliveness. And that doesn't mean there's not going to be variation and fluctuation over the years, of course, but that reawakening, like you're talking about, of that electricity and that just, oh, I just love you so much, and oh, you're just so gorgeous, or whatever that is. It's all that we experience at the beginning of a relationship is always there. But what comes in, as you're saying, is that we get caught up in these narratives and conditioning, and all of these layers of judgment come in that have us not experience what's really available to us. And as we free ourselves up from that, as we connect more deeply with who we are and get present rather than live in our conditioning, it opens up this presence with ourselves and also presence with our partner, so that we
Mhm,
can connect again in the way that we connected during that early time. And why was it like that in the honeymoon stage? Because we didn't have anything on our mind. We
right.
were just so present in the moment. That's why it was so amazing. So that can happen at any point, whether, I think Angus and I are married, I think it's 27 years this summer. And I absolutely feel that the relationship keeps getting better and deeper and richer, and that there's just so much that I'm looking forward to in that discovery, because in a sense, it's each day is a new day. It's like who knows what's going to unfold and what's going to show up when we're living in the present in that way. And I hear you
Mhm.
doing that the same with your husband, which I think is really beautiful.
Yeah, and it's really great that, we're all showing up, doing the best we can every single day and growing to be able to grow together and to not have, stories getting in our way of that growth and that progress.
Yeah.
And just being able to be curious and love is such a blessing and a gift.
Yeah, it is. Jenn, I'm noticing the time. I know we've gone a little over, so thank you so much for being so generous with it. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up? Not that you need to, but I just want to leave you that space if there is.
No, no, not at all. It's
Mm.
been a real pleasure to speak with you and spend time together. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
yeah, thank you. And thanks so much for sending over those additional resources for our listeners. Really, we're grateful.